When you study music history, you learn pretty quickly that everything traces back to either jazz or the blues. Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. I'm Vanessa, and I'm a musicologist and a historian of the 20th century, and this is Raised by Hippies. I've talked about her before on my other account, just like a few other early jazz musicians like Ella Fitzgerald, but this was the first time I ever really got to dig deep into someone like Billie's story. If you dig this kind of content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel for more in-depth looks at music and musicians and the way that they affected our culture and society in the 20th century. When I make a long-form video like that, this one was about 45 minutes, I try really hard to accurately portray what the artist's life was actually like at the time. I love context. Context is the most important thing to a historian, and it's essential to understanding the choices and actions of any individual throughout history. And Billie's context was brutal. Direct descendant of enslaved people, her great-grandmother used to tell her stories about the old days. Her parents were only 13 and 15 years old when she was born. Her mother, a child herself, abandoned Billie frequently with whoever was available, and often that meant abusive and neglectful situations. This all led to her being just 10 years old when she was first sexually assaulted by a man in the neighborhood, something that happened repeatedly to Billie Holiday because she just didn't have anybody to protect her. So in the early 1930s, Billie Holiday moves to Harlem to be with her mother, who was living in a brothel at the time, and she soon became a sex worker herself. She said she heard great jazz for the first time in a brothel. She loved Louis Armstrong and Bessie Smith, and she got to watch the Harlem Renaissance at its peak before joining it herself at just 15 years old when she realized that she could also sing.
Did you know Bessie Smith very well?
Yes, I did. I met her in the later years. I was working on a little, as we would say, joint called a hot shop on 7th Avenue, and that's when I met her just about 5 years before she died.
Uh-huh. Well, that must have been like catching up with part of jazz history for you.
A couple of years after that, she was discovered, if you can say that, by a man named John Hammond, a rich boy descendant of the Vanderbilts who would be responsible for making many of the personalities of the 20th century famous.
You are descendant of the Vanderbilts. And what did you hear that said to you, I have to let the rest of the world know about this?
I heard a singer who was an improvising horn player. She would take a pop tune, sing it at each table, and she'd sing it entirely differently every time.
Was she styling herself after a horn player?
Oh, sure. No question about it.
He just liked what he heard when he visited the clubs in Harlem, and happened to have a great deal of clout at Columbia Records. This was where Billie Holiday would get her first record contract, but she would blow it when she refused not to sing this incredible song. Written by a Jewish schoolteacher in the Bronx who was horrified by images of lynchings that he'd seen in the South. This was, of course, the wind down of the Jim Crow era. The song, Strange Fruit, was as bold as any could be in 1939, when she recorded it herself for the first time on a little independent label called Commodore Records. And soon, the song was brought to the attention of Harry Anslinger, the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics.
The Treasury Department intends to pursue a relentless warfare against the despicable, dope-peddling vulture who preys on the weakness of his fellow man.
Basically what happened is Billie Holiday and everybody else in the jazz scene at the time were well known for their use of a specific substance. A substance which had recently become illegal in the United States at the end of Prohibition because it had to be something, right? These federal agents were bad people. They stood for everything that Jim Crow was about, and they blamed jazz music and the people who made jazz music for the spread of illegal substances in America. So when they heard Strange Fruit and realized the impact that this kind of song was going to have on a generation of Black Americans, they were terrified. They wanted to shut it down as fast as they could, and they targeted Billie Holiday and her known issues with addiction as a result of her incredibly traumatic childhood as their scapegoat. Billie also made the mistake of surrounding herself with some pretty bad people. She was married 3 times, each one more abusive and exploitative than the last. They stole her money, they kept her all mixed up with substances, and they tried to take her down. One of her husbands was even involved when in 1947 she was arrested for possession and jailed for 10 months, producing one of the most badass mugshots in music history. Less than a week after she got out of prison, she sold out Carnegie Hall in New York. There was absolutely nothing that could take Billie Holiday down at this point, but they hounded her. There were federal agents in the audiences of her shows. Afterwards, they would go backstage and threaten her for singing that song. They would raid her hotel rooms and her tour buses. She had no peace, and her issues with addiction became more and more severe, eventually affecting her physical health. In the 1950s, music itself started to change rapidly. The post-war period introduced a whole new perspective on life itself in America. The Black veterans who had put their lives on the line for their country were no longer in any way willing to settle for Jim Crow and would lead the charge in the new civil rights movement. The Second World War had shifted the entire zeitgeist of culture around the world. It also introduced globalization, which opened people's eyes to a lot of different ways of living. It also had a huge effect on the music. Styles and genres mixed together like never before. More access to better instruments and amplifiers and recording devices changed what the average citizen was able to accomplish musically. And as more and more Black musicians came to the forefront of the music industry, and the language changed from race music to rhythm and blues, the voices of famous Black people also started to get louder. And we were long past the time of quiet disrespect and unwilling diligence. This was rock and roll.
What woman did you pattern yourself on? There are many women, I could say Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey and those chicks, but they weren't in my era. But I have to say Dinah Washington. I have to say Billie Holiday. Those 2 women that I do know personally, they led the life that they sang about.
Billie Holiday died in the hospital at just 44 years old. Cirrhosis, officially, but her body just failed. She'd had enough of this life. She was arrested in the hospital as she lay there dying and was handcuffed to her bed as if she was some sort of violent criminal. She died in 1956, which makes me believe that she might have been among the first very famous musicians to perish as a result of substance abuse. She was the first Black woman to have the kind of platform that she had and to use it to make statements about inequality and evil. She never got to see the civil rights movement come to the forefront. She never saw the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act. But what a contribution. And what her story did for me was it further solidified how incredibly powerful music can be. It saved her from her exceptionally difficult childhood, gave her opportunities she never would have dreamed of. It also allowed her the chance to communicate with her community in an act of solidarity on a widespread scale. It also told the rest of the outside world that these people were not going to take it anymore. And it was so terrifying to the powers that be that they shut it down in any way they could, to the point where it cost her her life. If you want to learn more about this incredible woman's story, follow the link in my bio for more information about my documentary. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell to learn about new content. See you in the next one.